Cooper Kupp was a third-round pick who had an average start to his career with one 1,000-yard season throughout his first 4 seasons, but that all changed in 2021 when Matthew Stafford was traded to the Rams and Cooper Kupp suddenly exploded, winning Offensive Player of the Year and the Triple Crown. But how did a lowly wide receiver 2 explode to finish with 439.5 PPR points? Let's find out more. Welcome to Fantasy Pancake. So yes, welcome into Fancy Pancake. This is our first ever episode, and as you can see by the stuff around me, I had to start off with a Rams player. We are going to be looking at Cooper Kupp's 2021 and trying to find out what we can learn from how he exploded to see if there's anyone that we can see might be able to do the same in 2024. So starting off by just looking by the numbers, Cooper Kupp's 2021 was potentially the most dominant season we've ever seen from a wide receiver, not just finishing with the Triple Crown, but dominating in each of the three categories. And this isn't just the case in the regular season. If you include the postseason and the playoffs, Cooper Kupp finished with the most receptions and receiving yards in a single season. He is the only player to ever record 2,000 receiving yards in a whole season. That is if you include the playoffs. I, for one, was incredibly disappointed not to see him get it in that final game and become the first ever 2,000-yard wide receiver. Obviously, I am incredibly biased on this topic, but it's really nice to start off with something that I'm passionate about. But one of the really important things here is to think, how did this happen? And can anyone do the same thing this year? We're going to start with a little caveat. Probably not. Cooper Kupp's 2021 was maybe, as I've said, the greatest season a wide receiver has ever put together. It's very unlikely that any wide receiver is going to do the same this season, but there is one that I have in mind who fits a few of the categories that I've got in front of me and may be able to have a pretty impressive 2024. But before we want to get started, I just want to ask you if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and all of that classic YouTube business. It's really going to help me as I grow the channel and try to continue to bring you great content throughout the course of this season and hopefully beyond. We've got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks, so hopefully there's going to be lots of things for you to enjoy. So there's three categories that I have in mind which led to Cooper Kupp's explosion in 2021. And the first one is incredibly obvious. Matthew Stafford was traded from the Lions to the Rams for 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, and Jared Goff, which at the time didn't sound like a great part of the deal. But now he's gone on to become a playoff quarterback again, so all good for Jared. But what is it about Matthew Stafford that meant that Cooper Kupp was able to explode in this way? Now, we all heard the reports of them having breakfast together before the season started, and we'd heard about the fact that they had this incredible chemistry. But more so than that, Matthew Stafford coming into the Rams meant that Sean McVay was able to change his scheme to accommodate for Matthew Stafford's strengths. We'd known for a while that Sean McVay had often had a very play-action heavy scheme, partly due to the fact that he loved running those outside zone runs, but also due to the fact that Jared Goff worked best off of play-action. Now, with Matthew Stafford now in charge of the offense, this led Sean McVay to be able to do something slightly different. And it led to being more pass happy, both in the open field, but also when we got into the red zone, as we saw with the massive amount of touchdowns that Cooper Kupp was able to score in 2021. The other thing which is definitely worth considering with Matthew Stafford is he's always been someone who's very happy to just lock in and feed one guy in particular. Now, obviously, this is the case when Matthew Stafford has had the 2 highest receiving yards in any single season, with Calvin Johnson and then with Cooper Kupp. So we know that he's someone that's just able to lock in and just fixate on one guy. He's an incredibly talented quarterback. He's an incredibly accurate quarterback. And it also allowed Sean McVay to just open his offense up and run some of the plays that he'd wanted to run for a while, but hadn't really been able to. Another important part to reflect on in terms of the way that the playbook opened up was the way in which Sean McVay was aligning Cooper Kupp. By basically the end of week 2, Cooper Kupp was aligning at every single possible wide receiver spot all across the formation, but also out of the backfield. Now, this was a big innovation for 2021 that Sean McVay brought into the offense, and is something that we've definitely seen repeated since, actually by some of that Sean McVay coaching tree, particularly Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. And that's something we're going to come back to later about the way in which the Sean McVay coaching tree is really important to this move. But we actually saw this in training camp. It was one of the many plays that the Rams were reported to have not allowed reporters to write about because they thought this was going to be an absolute treat when they got into the regular season and could run it for real. And this was definitely the case. We saw in week 1, Cooper Kupp score a touchdown running a route out of the background, running a wheel route that we normally see from running backs. But when you get someone out there with the route running chops that he has, it made a huge difference. So you can see the way in which that bringing in Matthew Stafford meant that the playbook could open up. So there's a lot of changes there to be seen in a very quick time period. So the chemistry with Matthew Stafford is really one thing. But then what about Cooper Kupp himself as a player? What can we learn from him? Now, Cooper Kupp was drafted in the 3rd round back in 2017. There were some in the industry that had Cooper Kupp quite high up their board, ahead of wide receivers like Chris Godwin and others, taken in that class. But when the Rams did take him in the 3rd round, it was seen as a little bit of a reach. What the Rams organization saw was a versatile player, someone with great route running ability, but also someone with incredible in-game intelligence. So that's someone who's able to learn the playbook by heart. And Sean McVay is quoted about Cooper Kupp as saying it's essentially like having someone play quarterback from the wide receiver position. So that's definitely part of this, that Cooper Kupp was able to be intelligent and technical in his play once that offense had then opened up. It meant that there was a huge amount of potential for him to explode because he was the number 1 wide receiver in the offense, but also he had the intelligence and the game technique to continue to open up. All you need to see is this clip of Cooper Kupp speaking after the game to tell you everything you need to know about how smart this guy is.
Touchdown specifically, your defender went and blitzed. What did you see there? How were you able to use that to your advantage?
Yeah, they just had a little 3-deep fire zone, brought the nickel off the edge, safety dropped down. It didn't look like they were doing a replacement fire zone, so I knew at the back away we were going to get 3 pushing through. I had an opportunity to kind of run in there if I could beat my guy, and just had to beat the safety to the end zone.
Another really important facet to look at in terms of Cooper Kupp's ability to break out in 2021 and dominate fantasy football was the lack of other targets on the roster. When you look across the roster, the player with the next highest receiving yards behind Cooper Kupp's is Van Jefferson, finishing at around 800 yards. They also had Robert Woods on the roster, but he got injured at the midpoint. They also then had Odell Beckham Jr., who came in later, but mostly was a part to play towards the playoffs and then in the Super Bowl in that incredible second half before he unfortunately got hurt. I think he was probably on his path to winning Super Bowl MVP, but it didn't matter so much. We still won it, as you can see from this flag right here, this guy right here. So a really important facet here is knowing that Cooper Kupp could be fed targets by a quarterback who was willing to just absolutely feed one guy. He had an offensive coach who was willing to just trust him in all facets of the game, and he had barely any other target competition around him. So Cooper Kupp was able to dominate fantasy football because he had an unbelievable amount of targets, but also trust from a head coach to give them to him and a talented quarterback that was able to feed him targets in the right way. And then he himself was a talented and smart enough player to translate that into huge fantasy success. So, this is the bit that you've all been waiting for. Who is the player that I think can dominate in 2024 in a Cooper Kupp-like explosion? Now, the first thing to look at is the quarterbacks. So a new quarterback situation. And we have one. We have a couple across the league who have changed places, but there's a really important one, if he's healthy, in Atlanta. Kirk Cousins is an incredibly talented quarterback who, as we've seen with Justin Jefferson in the last couple of years, and even Adam Thielen before that, is willing to pick one guy and absolutely feed him the ball. So then when we take a look at Atlanta a little bit deeper, we see that they've actually brought in new offensive coaches from the Rams. They've got Raheem Morris as their head coach, but their new offensive coordinator was the quarterback's coach of the Rams. So you've got a new scheme coming in and someone from that same Sean McVay tree who's willing to feed a wide receiver and very intelligent in the way that they can use new pieces and the way that they can make sure that talented players are schemed up to succeed. And then when we look across the depth chart, there's very little there outside of the wide receiver one. Darnell Mooney is currently the wide receiver two. They traded for Rondale Moore from the Cardinals. You can tell how good a player he is by the fact I could barely even remember his name. But he got injured before the season. So at this point, despite how much of an avid fantasy player I am, I don't even think I can name the Falcons wide receiver three. Obviously, they have Kyle Pitts as well, who is another player that I'm really excited about. But there's very little target competition out there. And that's why I think that there's a chance that Drake London could be the next player to explode in 2024. When you look into his scouting report as well by Lance Zierlein on NFL.com, he was scouted as a very highly intelligent player with the motor to keep going. He's versatile across all three areas of the field. You know, he's a very good contested catcher, but also is kind of a power slot more than anything else, and a very good route runner. And he fits into that similar mold as a player who has been good, but not great, even though we know there's more potential there. But I think Drake London fits the criteria of what we can learn from Cooper Kupp's 2021 and potentially explodes to be a breakout star in 2024. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Lewis Wood. I'll see you next time.